The Road to War 3. Carmen slipped through the elevator doors as soon as they were wide enough and wrapped Lee in a bear hug. The other miners slapped him on the back too. Some wanted to help when he told them his plan. He refused and pointed to the bubbly, unguided wall of crysteel in a silent reminder of what would happen to him the moment Vice President DeWall was freed. 5 older miners from the night shift wouldn't take Lee's no for an answer. With no families to support and no respect for Lee as the very temporary ranking authority in Facility 12, they organized themselves and helped collect the supplies Lee's plan called for. With only hours and perhaps minutes before the next dropship arrived, Lee relented. But he drew the line at the old farts. No family men were allowed to stay in the mine and play along. The replacement crew could have put up a fight when they trudged across the tarmac from the crew quarters, but when Lee announced the work stoppage, they only cheered. Then they alternately thanked him and avoided his gaze, knowing how much today would cost him. After all the prep was done, he ordered all personnel back to quarters and collected the old farts out to the tarmac. The landing jets of the first of 3 incoming craft, pinged by ground control, lit up the sky just then, so there was no time for fine words. Lee ignored the ship's hails. With the old farts gathered all around him, he tapped the screen of his handheld one more time. The old farts cheered with him as the shockwave rumbled through their feet. Moments later, air pushed up the throat of the elevator shaft, billowed into the sky, raising a cloud of dust that brought Lee a few more minutes of freedom as the landers hovered above the now-hidden tarmac. Then all 3 ships came down, along with the full might of Karen Corporation. The old bachelors were beside him, jeering and shouting at the dozen armored security officers lining up between them and the dropships. A nervous-looking administrator flown over from Facility 14 demanded explanations from behind the wall of black boots and batons. When he had answers, he ordered his men to take Lee into custody. The farts must have known what would happen. What were they planning to do, smuggle Lee off the facility? It made no sense to him, but they formed a line, and when the security goons came, they fought. The goons pummeled the old miners. They drew blood and cracked bones and kept on hammering their crumpled forms when they went down. When the batons fell, Lee fought back. He hadn't planned to. He'd known his fate was sealed when he'd prepped the crystal bombs in the mines, detonating every gas pocket at once. It would take months to repair the damage and cost Karen Corporation millions. But no other miners would die. Lee had wondered, even before he blew the first shelter bomb in the operations center, if he would ever see the light of day again. But he was ready to surrender. He was even proud. Now the choices had all been made, the buttons all pushed. Until he saw the insides of an old miner's skull spray across the tarmac. Then he fought like hell. He lost. The beatings ended when the replacement day shift miners collected all around the tarmac, clicking their radios to create an avalanche of squawks. The guards didn't need to be ordered off, they just had to look around. The guards dragged Lee and the old farts to the nearest dropship and tossed them in. Through the barest slits in his bloody, swollen eyes, he watched miners along the tarmac salute him as he was thrown into the ship. They left him in a pile with the dead miner, gasping for air. The cannulas were still in his nostrils, but the tubes had been cut. His lungs ached for air as the door closed, leaving him in the dark as the rumbling of the engines built beneath him. His bones cracked as the thrust drove him into the floor. He couldn't feel the new pain through the still searing explosions of his beating. His mind conjured up a view of the hills from the porch on his farm. He squeezed his hands around nothing, conjuring the feeling of Maggie's hand sliding inside his. The world and the pain faded away. January 2, 2347. Earth Convoy Staging Ground 2 million miles beyond lunar orbit. Reach Convoy 51. Aboard Convoy Flagship. Return. Fold event imminent. If you've got nothing to hide, show us what's in your holds. I'm surprised you haven't hacked or bought your way in already. Admiral, I must protest. This Earther is obstructing our right to inspection. It's the Reach ambassador who's obstructing. They're intentionally delaying transfer of cargo we already paid for. Admiral Ashlan Daku ignored the angry words and passed the glowing screen back to the officer standing at attention before her. Thank you, Lieutenant. Be safe up there. Dismissed. The message bearer couldn't hide his gratitude as he saluted and fled the elegantly appointed sitting room for the Spartan ship's corridor beyond. Airlocks slid down from both walls to seal in the middle. Their surfaces were painted with swaths of color to disguise their purpose. The entire room was bathed in elegance. Glass-front bookcases, paintings, luxurious sofas and chairs populated the room. Persian rugs were even fixed to the floor. Soothing yellow light thrown from lamps instead of glow squares or wall tracks completed the sense that this was an important place. Only one incongruity pierced the illusion of timelessness and order. In the very center of the room stood a circular plastic and glass table. 7 crash couches, raised to sitting positions, surrounded it. Only 2 couches were occupied. Ashlan kept the weight of her concerns from showing on her face, instead constructing the understanding, patient expression she saved for rich fools and politicians. Ambassadors, she purred in her deep, smoky voice as she reclaimed the seat between a man and a woman. This is no way to start our journey together. Let's begin again, shall we? The man and woman were silent as Ashlan clipped the flight harness into place. My auntie once shared with me her secret to a happy marriage, she said lightly, her smile warming the edges of her mingled Persian and Ostrovian accent. Shall I share it with you, Dennis? The ambassador for Earth stopped glaring at the other man long enough to catch Ashlan's eye. People had a hard time staying angry when Ashlan poured on the charm. She hoped she had enough of it stocked for the years ahead. She peered at him playfully, and Dennis rolled his eyes. Yes, Admiral, he chuckled. Please do. She nodded her gratitude and swung her head to the woman, her eyebrows asking for permission. The ambassador for Reach shrugged her shoulders noncommittally. Sure, Admiral. She held a hand to her chest. I am Ashlan, please. The woman rolled her eyes. Spare me the I'm just a simple woman routine, Ashlan. Wearing robes and silks instead of a uniform doesn't fool anyone. You're no grandmother. You're military commander of a 36,000-person, 29-ship-strong military force, Admiral. Ashlan laughed. Coral, these convoys are joint ventures between all 7 world members, not invasion fleets. She ran her silk scarf between her fingers. I wear no uniform because I represent no government. Convoy law governs us all, even if I enforce it on this particular crossing. There are no other laws where we are about to go. Just like a marriage, we need to work together. I've shepherded 3 convoys before, she sighed. No one talks about the work done between our worlds in the space between them, but we always do the work. She leaned forward, whispering conspiratorially. We will do the work again. Consider it our honeymoon. That provoked nervous laughter all around. There were no windows in this room, deep inside the centrifugal wheel providing Convoy Flagship return with gravity, but the bolts of energy surging and arcing around the convoy were all on their minds just the same. Folding a bubble of space-time full of ships, cargo, and crew through a man-made hole in our reality was a proven shortcut to crossing the galaxy in years instead of centuries. Traveling by fold was a great boon that allowed Earth to found the 6 colonies of which Reach was one, as was Ashlan's own home of Ostrov. The fold was also a great equalizer. The moments after the universe went away, or rather the convoy inside the fold perimeter were pushed outside of it, were marked by violent graphitic, electric, and magnetic storms called the churn. Ships were tossed like marbles. Some were sucked to the edges of the fold's tiny, temporary spherical reality where titanic forces crushed them to nothing. People died, even rich people, even important people. Even the ruling elite, like Dennis and Coral, could disappear in the churn. Mostly they survived, and seldom were the heavily fortified bunkers, like this one, on ships strategically positioned in the safest parts of the convoy, ever touched. Like the sailing ships who braved the seas, the first brave ships pierced the black of space to plunder other planets, convoys promised wealth, prosperity, and opportunity on a scale too vast not to pursue. But those minutes before the fold took hold, they were murder on the nerves. The fold would happen when the fold happened. The science of predicting the threshold for a fold was accurate to within 31 hours, but inside of today, the men and women of the convoy could only wait for the rough weather to come. And wait they did, in ships of all kinds and sizes. Some were little more than airtight buildings reinforced against the treacherous churn. Spinning wheels provided gravity to some. Scaffolds of metal connected engines to tanks of air and water and fuel onto others. The awkward and ungainly, the impractically beautiful, and the stalwart and ugly. The waiting was hard for them all. As often happened when frightened laughter was let loose, Ashland, Dennis, and Coral were soon hooting and howling. The cathartic release was on a scale beyond the joke, but that was okay too. "The secret?" she prompted again. Dennis nodded, wiping tears from his eyes. This time Coral, too, gestured for Ashland to continue. "A happy marriage," Ashland shared, "is the union of two good forgivers." Dennis and Coral eyed each other warily again. "There needs to be trust for forgiveness," Coral said, directing the words past Ashland to Earth's ambassador. "We know about the farm equipment you sent to Reach in the last convoy. You want Reach to trust you? We need some assurances we're not going to pop out the fold over Earth 2.0. Dennis sniffed. "We've taken sensible precautions, nothing more. Gov has never and will never initiate a conflict with a colony world. You can consider that my word." He leaned forward. "I would like your word that the cyber attacks and surveillance of our research projects and business properties will stop." "Yes, this is what time in convoy is for," Ashland assured them both. "Changes to inspection protocol can be arranged," she assured Carol, raising a hand to preemptively calm the Earth ambassador. "And in exchange, an effort could be made to sway the wholly unaffiliated groups conducting politically motivated penetrations." Carol stiffened. Ashland touched her arm. "On both sides, yes?" Neither ambassador replied. Ashland extended her hands toward the empty chairs around the table. "There's just us three this time. We have 26 months together, ambassadors. We owe it to the citizens of a hungry Earth and to a colony, being asked to do far more than anyone ever imagined to make that time count." Coral's lips pressed together as she pondered the mystery of those empty chairs. Ashland kept the confident smile on her face as she too stared at the empty places. 4 empty chairs. 4 lost colonies. Yanshu, Prise du Pied, Glory, Drayton. And if Ostrov didn't send a colony soon, it would officially be 5. While the last child of Earth teetered on the brink of war with her mother. "Earth really doesn't know?" Coral asked, her eyes desperate for an answer from the Admiral or Earth's ambassador. "No one knows," Ashland answered, and Dennis struggled for opacity. He knew no more than she. Ashland was sure even Earth couldn't keep a secret of this magnitude. Why would it? No, Dennis did not know, and that's what made him so angry. To cover the fear. Artfully hidden emergency lights flashed red. Dennis stiffened. Did we fold? Red lights, not yellow. Ashlyn hid her own concern. Let's see. Sliding her fingers across the table, she triggered a view of what lay outside. Red and orange streaks of energy swirling fast just beyond the outermost ships of the convoy, the moon and Earth in the distance. The doors hissed open. Another break in protocol, Ashlyn thought, anxiety rising. Had there been another terrorist attack? Had violence broken out between Earther and Reacher factions? Thundering boots echoed in the hall. Too many people were on their feet instead of strapping in, as was protocol with the fold almost on top of them. It could happen in minutes or hours or seconds. What had possessed her crew? Ashlyn was shaken further to hear panicked shouts from the veteran convoy crew racing past in the corridor. She was on her feet and rounding the table when the senior duty officer for the wheel appeared, screaming for Ashlyn to come, to see. She followed. The ambassadors followed. The duty officer held her hand to her mouth, unable to answer their questions. Ashlyn pressed her for answers in commanding tones and honeyed ones, but to no avail. They squeezed into the elevator and rounded on the duty officer, but she backed into the corner, shaking her head. Tears leaked out of her eyes. She pressed her other hand to her mouth as if holding in a scream. The doors opened on the outer level of the spinning, gravity-providing space wheel. Here, audible alarms hammered at her ears. Dennis succumbed to the duty officer's terror and froze in the elevator, but Coral followed Ashlyn. Half a dozen crew were on their knees in the corridor or slumped against the wall, crying. Ashlyn ran past them, danced around stumbling on seeing senior officers, struck dumb and mute from shock. Ashlyn made it to the outer observation deck. Her decades aboard ship allowed her to look out at the world spinning around and orient herself quickly enough to see what had changed in their world. Her legs almost gave out. "By my gods, no!" Ashlyn gasped. "What? Ashlyn, what is—" The Reach ambassador's words cut off. Blown-up images dotted every screen in the room. Wordlessly, she buried her face in Ashlyn's shoulder, shaking with silent sobs and screams. "It's coming!" someone screamed, just as the orange and red bolts racing faster and faster around the convoy exploded into a wall of color. The pink of sunset shifted to bloody neon and finally exploded into a searing corona of white for the barest of instants. And when the light was gone, so was the convoy, in another place. The faintest after-images of the light remained to illuminate the black of true nothingness beyond. Ashlyn grabbed the woman crying on her shoulder and squeezed her tight. Her own tears spilled. They were in the fold, their years-long journey to Reach begun. The world outside was gone. You have been listening to Reach, The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Music, All This by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Hear more of the story at servingworlds.com. Thank you for listening.